Part 2 of the Washington administration. The U.S.'s overall early foreign policy strategy would be called unilateralism. This is the term that is used to this day. It's our original foreign policy, and we come back to it from time to time. This is a one-sided foreign policy. Minimal consultation with other countries. We're going to do it because it benefits us, and we're not really going to ask and discuss this with many other countries. We act in our own best interest. Unilateralism means one-sided. So, the French Revolution, as you see, fighting for the same rights we were fighting for in America, and had fought against Britain. But as you see, radicals were killing the king and the aristocracy in France. So, do we help them out? And then, of course, you have Britain and France. They go to war with one another. So, do we help them out? And remember, Thomas Jefferson is our Secretary of State, and he says we should honor our alliance with France. And we had this alliance with them since 1778. Remember, they came in and helped us while we were fighting a king in the American Revolution. Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury, he says, no, we should not help them. It was going to hurt our economy. We have a weak military, and we get nothing out of this. We're just going to cause a lot of hardships on us, on the American people. So, Washington listens to these two fight and argue back and forth, and Washington finally sides with Alexander Hamilton, and he issues the Proclamation of Neutrality. This is the point where I like to get into Edward Ghent. He is a French diplomat, and he is going to violate this treaty by trying to encourage Americans to support France in the war with France and Britain. American merchants traded with both sides, but he was arguing you need to help France out. So this violates this off the from the beginning. This violates the Neutrality Act. As you see, this is going to bring retaliation from the British. They began to seize American merchant ships and force their crews into service on the British naval ships. This is called impressment. Put a star by it because it's going to actually get us into a war. But it starts in 1793 with the Neutrality Act. So in frustration, because one of our first foreign policy statements is we violate a treaty that we had signed with France. So out of frustration, Thomas Jefferson resigns his position. So he moves on. So Jay's Treaty in 1794. George Washington asked John Jay, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, to go over to Britain and try to make a deal with the British government. And he does this because John Jay is one of the few people he trusts that there's going to be a pro-British person who won't try to sink the treaty, who won't try to, say Britain wouldn't agree to anything. So he was a trusted member of George Washington. And as you see, United States and Britain remained high. Tensions remained high after the Revolutionary War. And guys, it looked like we're going back to war with Britain here in 1794. There are 4 key issues you need to know. The British exports flooded the U.S. markets while American exports were being blocked from Britain. In other words, we couldn't trade. We bought British goods, but Britain wouldn't buy any of our goods. So, as you see, it's being blocked by British trade restrictions and tariffs. The U.S. wanted to trade in the Caribbean, and we wanted to trade with Britain in the Caribbean. It'd be a good close place for us to trade. The British occupation of northern forts in the British government had agreed to vacate in the Treaty of Paris in 1783. They had not vacated their forts. The British still sent resupplies of troops and supplies to these areas, and these British soldiers were instigating the natives to rise up and fight the Americans. So as you see, number 3, the recurrent Native American tax in these areas, we knew the British soldiers were encouraging this. So Britain's impressment of American sailors and seizures of naval and military stores, supplies, basically bound to French ports on neutral ships, brought the two nations on the brink of war in the late 1700s, really 1793, 1794. So these are the issues we've got to talk about. And here's what happens. So Washington sends over Chief Justice John Jay because he's a pro-British negotiator, Federalist. Jay negotiated the treaty with the British, which attempted to settle these conflicts at sea as well as curtail English agitation of their Indian allies in the western boundaries. However, as you see, the treaty did settle disputes with debts from the Revolutionary War. The U.S. obtained a surrender of the Northwest Post, but remember, this had already been done in 1783, and we get a commercial treaty with Britain that granted us the most favored nation status, but it restricted our commercial trade access to only the British West Indies. And like I said, we wanted to trade there anyway, but we wanted it to lead to us trading to Britain. In this treaty, it just restricts it to the West Indies. So Jay's going to be criticized for his efforts. Britain had the right to seize cargo en route to France. So he didn't take care of impressment. That's what he was supposed to really be trying to take care of, and he didn't. The U.S. gained most favored status nation. That's good. All right. It's ratified barely by Congress. It prevented war with Britain. However, you need to know this is a very unpopular treaty. It didn't really settle the issue of impressment, and it didn't really open up trade so much for us. As you see, it does open up a little bit in the West Indies. But this treaty was supposed to deal with impressment issues, and it really did not. So this is the scandalous point of George Washington's administration. This is kind of his black eye. Usually most two-term presidents have a black eye moment where there's a scandal or there's something that breaks out and it really kind of tarnishes them a little bit. This is it for George Washington. The treaty with Spain, Pinkney's Treaty, or the Treaty of 1795, you need to know this one. This is very important as well. Thomas Pinkney, this is a much brighter spot for the Washington administration. He brought Spain to strengthen what the Spanish thought was their deteriorating position on the American frontier. So the Spanish opened the Mississippi River up to American traffic, including New Orleans, and recognized the 31st parallel in northern part of Florida as the boundary. Guys, this opened the Mississippi River up for us to farm out in the western lands, which is today like Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and those areas. So this opens the Mississippi up for the frontier farmer in the west, Missouri, those areas, and they can get their goods to the market. So this treaty here completely changes the southwestern frontier of the U.S. So as far as frontier problems are concerned, Native American tribes were increasingly resisting encroachments on their land. Natives formed the Western Confederacy. Tecumseh is going to be integral in this, and so is Little Turtle, as you see. Little Turtle of the Miami Indians is going to lead a war effort. That's Little Turtle. The British authorities were encouraging Native Americans to go to war against the Americans on the frontier, on the frontier areas. Little Turtle's War, also known as the Northwest Indian Wars from 1790 to 1795, waged on for 5 years, off and on, not 5 years consistently. General Wayne will finally defeat native tribes at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, where the Treaty of Greenville signed, and it clears the Ohio territory of Indians. So in other words, the modern day state of Ohio, that whole territory in there can be settled by American settlers. So that's what the Treaty of Greenville is important for. And remember, Chief Little Turtle is a Miami Indian. Guys, Miami, Ohio, it's actually a Native American name. Miami is. So, and it's in Ohio. But I know you're thinking of Florida, but it's in Ohio. So this is an activity that we've had to do and I think you're going to have to do it. But you're going to read these and basically, what is this stuff suggesting? So in Washington's farewell address, as you see, he only serves 2 terms, and this sets the standard for every other president until Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When FDR served, he actually was elected to 4 terms as president, served 3 of them, and he lived long enough to serve, I think it was 80-something days, maybe 100 and something days into his 4th term. He died in April of 45. So here's a list of some of Washington's historical achievements. If you look here, Continental Army, able to stop first challenge to federal authority with the Whiskey Rebellion, declared that America should remain neutral, sets a precedent of presidents only serving 2 terms. We are finished.